Sean Diddy Combs acquitted of the most serious charges he faced in federal criminal court: racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. But the music mogul will remain behind bars until his sentencing after the judge denied bail, saying the defense did not prove Combs is not a danger to the public.
I want everyone to know the job is not done yet.
The jury of 8 men and 4 women deliberating for just over 13 hours, finding Combs guilty of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, each carrying a maximum 10-year prison sentence. Pumping his fist inside the courtroom after the verdict was read, later kneeling down and appearing to pray once the judge dismissed the jury, telling his family behind him, quote, "I'm gonna be home soon. I love you." The defense claiming victory with the partial conviction.
Sean Combs has not sexually assaulted anybody. We've said it with each lawsuit that came out, and today that was proven true.
Prosecutors arguing the rapper ran a criminal enterprise for 2 decades, using his wealth and power to force his victims to submit. Over the 7-week trial, dozens of witnesses took the stand, including escorts, former assistants, and alleged victims who detailed drug-fueled parties, known as freak-offs. Among them, Combs' former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, who recounted years of alleged abuse and violence.
She really wanted to give a voice to others who suffer in silence.
There's a lot to get into in regard to the Sean Diddy Combs trial and verdict. Please welcome back our panel, Dr. Jeanette Brooks, sexual assault, rape, and human trafficking survivor and founder of Unmute Yourself, that focuses on breaking the cycles of gun, sexual, and domestic violence. Vic Williams, human trafficking advocate and retired Homeland Security Investigations, also founder of Quest to Freedom, an anti-human trafficking organization, and attorney Jeremy McLymont, a civil rights and criminal defense attorney. He is new to the show. We welcome his legal analysis. Thank you all for joining me on Voices. A lot to dive into. So first, let's get to the verdict. Sean Diddy Combs was acquitted of racketeering and sex trafficking charges and found guilty on 2 lesser charges of transportation of former girlfriends for prostitution. Were you surprised by the verdict? So let's get into the testimony from the government's key witnesses after that. But first, were you surprised by the verdict?
Yes.
Vic?
Yes.
You were surprised by it?
Disappointed and felt like it's a setback in this fight against human trafficking.
All right. Dr. Jeanette Brooks, George?
Not surprised, but very disappointed. And I agree with Vic. It is certainly a setback in the process of victims sharing their story and feeling that their voices are being taken seriously.
And of course, we do have a legal mind on the panel. So, Jeremy, I got to ask you, man, were you surprised by the verdict?
I'm not going to lie. I was surprised, right? And not surprised at the same time, because juries always do things that you never know why they do it. But yeah, definitely I was surprised at the verdict. Okay,
and we're going to get into that. We're going to get into your legal analysis and maybe whether or not the government just botched their case against Sean Diddy Combs. So let's get right to it. Okay, getting back to the government's key witnesses in the case, Casey Ventura and Jane. They were very, very powerful, but were their testimonies enough? Were you convinced by their testimonies at all by listening to them? So, Jeanette, let's start with you.
Yes, I was very convinced by their testimonies. They shared from their heart. I'm sure they told all truths. My concern was that the audience or the jurors were not really moved by it or concerned.
Well, Ventura said about the freak-offs in her testimony that, quote, "I had a whole other job basically as a sex worker," end quote, and that Combs raped her back in August of 2018 before she had consensual sex with him a short time later. Do you believe that some of her testimony may have hurt the case, Vic?
No, my thing is, when you work in this space, you know, we live in a space that we're victim-centered, trauma-informed. So we listen to victims. We give them that opportunity to explain. So being an investigator, my job is, you come and complain about something, is to corroborate your stories, places you've been, things you've done, to see if there's a case there before I go further into the investigation. So I wasn't surprised or disappointed. I believe what they said. And as she was saying, it's not me. You have to convince the jury of what you're saying is true. So, you know.
And what about the pictures and the video of abuse? What do you think that did not to, or level up to as far as human trafficking, the force, fraud, or coercion, all that, all the evidence that was there. Do you believe that it was enough to, apparently the jury didn't believe that. So Jeremy, let's talk to you about that.
So I could talk about the sex trafficking, right? Because the evidence for sex trafficking is there, but there's I think, in my opinion, I think the jury may have gotten it right for the sex trafficking just because of how the case was presented, right? But for the sex trafficking, you have to have fraud, coercion, these sorts of acts of violence to force someone to get them to engage in these commercial sex acts, right? So the acts were there. Like, you could see it on the video, the coercion, the force, you know, whether it be the drugs, whether it be the beating, whether it be dragging her back to the room. When I say her, I mean Cassie back to the room. But the question remains, were these things done to force her to engage in these sex acts? And the defense highlighted, it wasn't Cassie's necessarily her testimony that gave an issue, but they highlighted evidence from the past, her text messages and these things, saying that she wanted to be involved in these things. And that would give a jury a reason to doubt, right? So that's a reasonable doubt. So when she's saying one thing on the stand and then the text messages show something completely different, I could see where the jury came to the conclusion that he was not guilty of the sex trafficking.
And then, Vic, I wanted to talk to you because you and I were talking off camera about expert witness testimony as well, to talk about human trafficking and what it is. And you when you were on here before, you said that was very important, the expert testimony, but you didn't think that the expert testimony did a good job at all.
The lady that testified as an expert has done this in really high-profile cases. I think she testified in the R. Kelly case and some other cases, but I didn't get her complete, what she said. I just recorded what was recorded based on what was reported from the news media.
Absolutely.
And so listening to some of her quotes, she was talking about trauma bonding. Remember, we talked about what trauma bonding, why people don't leave, but she was relating it to domestic violence. Trauma bonding is all over this when it comes to human trafficking. And when you're saying trauma bonding and then going back to domestic violence, which the defense is, this is a domestic violence case, not a human trafficking case, it can confuse. So if I was an expert, I would have just been talking about how trauma bonding relates to human trafficking and why they don't leave. Because of fear. She's making calls because if she didn't do that, she's gonna get beaten. And that is hard to convince people if you're talking about domestic violence.
And that goes to the other witness, and that's Jane, because she testified that Combs made her feel like a prostitute. She testified that she felt obligated to perform, that Combs threatened to stop paying her rent if she didn't perform. She also said that she was abused, saying, quote, "He slapped me and punched me." So what do you think of her testimony, Dr. Jeanette? Do you believe that right there should have been enough, or along with the other evidence of the pictures showing abuse and everything else?
Yes, it should have been enough, because that's clear evidence of coercion. And we don't understand that coercion is the women are forced to do things that are dangerous for them because, as Victor said earlier, the alternative is worse. So I'm going to do this. If I organize the sex acts, I may be able to minimize some of what happens during that time because I'm organizing it and I can, probably plan with the other person something less abusive. Or the fact of the notion of going out to these hotels was the opportunity to be alone with Sean, and that's how he presented them. These were opportunities for us to be alone together. So they wanted that moment of romanticism with him, but it came at a price. And in their mindset, this was the only way to connect and reduce some of the violence that was already occurring, right? Which is all under the notion of coercion.
And then Kid Cudi's testimony. So I want to talk to you, Jeremy, about that. When he testified about his relationship with Cassie Ventura and about his car being torched by a Molotov cocktail, which he suspected a jealous Combs who had allegedly threatened him. Federal prosecutors would eventually ask the judge to strike attempted kidnapping and arson from jury instructions. So what do you think about Kid Cudi's testimony? And I know that they did that to simplify it for the jury, because then it would have been something else that the jury would have had to look into. Yeah. So what are your thoughts about Kid Cudi's testimony? Yeah, so he testifies, but a lot of his testimony is based on speculation. And I think that is one thing that a jury will hang on to. Right? If somebody's testifying that somebody came into the house
they destroyed the cameras or messed with their dog, but they don't have actual proof of it. And that the person, ripped open the top of their car and threw a Molotov cocktail in it, but they don't have the actual proof of it. It's giving the defense something to hang on to. It's like, hey, these prosecutors are putting evidence in front of you that they don't really have 100% concrete proof of. So they're doing this, they can do it about other things, right? And it gives the defense a leg, a room to get up in the case and to create reasonable doubt. So I think if you don't have concrete evidence of it as a prosecution, don't put it out there because it's just going to hurt your case.
Okay, and let's get back to some of the evidence. One of the special agents who planned the search at Diddy's Miami home last year showed jurors photos of items that many of you saw seized, including cell phones, drugs, dozens of bottles of lubricant, and a .45 caliber handgun, basically meant to bolster Ventura's account of drug-fueled freak-offs and sex trafficking allegations, but it failed. Why, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, if I would have presented this as tools of the trade. I've gone into many of, arrest warrants, where we're doing search warrants, and you're looking for tools of the trade. When we talked about the baby oil and lubricants, that's one thing you're gonna look for. One thing that was missing normally in these cases are the bags of condoms, right? I was like looking for those, so it's all how it's presented that the jury understand that these are tools of the trade when it comes to human trafficking.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break, guys. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we will talk about the sentencing phase. How much time should Sean Diddy Combs get for his 2 guilty charges? Hear what our panel thinks. Still ahead. Welcome back to Voices. We continue our discussion on the Sean Diddy Combs trial and verdict. The judge overseeing the federal trial has set the sentencing date for October 3rd. So how much time will the music mogul get? So let's start with our legal mind here. He faces a lot of time still. Do you think he will get that time?
The 10 years?
Yeah.
I don't think he's going to get 10 years, but the prosecution is pushing, right, the base offense level, and this is something like over a lot of people's head, but basically the base offense level, as calculated by his defense attorneys, would get him in a 21 to 27 month range. The prosecution, they can enhance charges. They can try to enhance charges, right? They can add enhancements. So they've added enhancements that his defense attorneys didn't include in that calculation, in that 21 to 27 months. And they're adding enhancements because they are out for blood. They've been out for blood since the beginning, and they now, because they lost, they want to make sure that they include every possible enhancement.
Also, they're going to take into account the impact statements of the victims of this crime. So I've seen where judges have enhanced based on what victims are saying, and that's the whole point of the impact.
Which is why some would say he didn't even get bond, because it was Cassie's attorney, because Cassie made sure her attorney sent the judge a letter saying why she felt threatened if he would be out on bond. Exactly. And so that's why I want to come to you, Dr. Jeanette. As a survivor, what would you like to see as far as time is concerned Sean Diddy Combs receive?
The 10 years at least.
The 10 years at least? At least the 10 years.
Yes.
Wow, wow. So,
and it could include time served, but at least the 10 years.
And I want to ask you all this. Your biggest takeaway from the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Your biggest takeaway from it.
The biggest takeaway is that juries do things that sometimes we have no understanding of.
My biggest takeaway is that we need to do more work in awareness. Our nation is very much a hypersexualized nation, and women's bodies are still subject for objectification.
I'm disappointed in the prosecution because we talked about usually these guys are really sharp. They just don't do cases to see what's going to happen. They fail to really help the jury understand the invisible chains that we don't see. People could be tied up or not, easy victim, but you don't get to see what's happening in people's heads, and they didn't make that connection.
All right, we'll be sure to post where people can contact you when we close this segment so people can get a hold of you if they need to. Thank you all for joining us for this important conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
You got it.